Welcome to the Free Outside podcast. I am just getting over a sickness, and I don't know why when I started doing this months ago that my younger self decided that I should do 2 of these a week. So here we are, like 8 months in, 9 months in, and I'm still doing 2 per week. But I think it's kind of fun and have gotten a lot of good guests on here, so excuse my voice. This thing has come a long ways. Today, let's get into one of the biggest topics sweeping the world. Well, at least the world of endurance sports. I mean, from cycling to triathlon to other endurance platforms, especially ultra running. I don't know if it's made it that much into like the FKT or fixed time running space. But are you ready for it? Let's get into heat training and cold plunging, because both are like big topics and they're both kind of bro culture too, but there is benefit to both of them. I think there can also be a downside to both of them. So let's dive right in. This is the Free Outside podcast here. Going to talk through some of the science, what's out there, what I do, what I think works, and then we're going to go from there. All right, let's start cold. Let's start with cold plunges. Cold plunges, if you don't know, basically people get in these tubs where there's ice surrounding, floating in them, and they get in and stay there for like 5 to 10 minutes or something. And it's really big in like reels and social media, and people want to act like they're really hard by getting in there and staying in there for a while. Now, there are benefits. It's just like growing up when you would ice an injury, or I grew up playing a lot of baseball and you would ice your arm after you pitched so that it would feel better in the morning. There was an ice bath or an ice tub, whatever we called it, in our varsity locker room in high school that a lot of the football players used too. So there are benefits. People have been doing it a lot longer than social media has been prevalent, especially the video portion of social media. That would have been in the early 2000s when I was in high school. So it existed back then, and that's much before any of these influencers were influencing. Unless you're David Goggins, he's been influencing probably forever. Okay, cold plunges. So it's cold water immersion. What it does do is it reduces muscle inflammation, which is done by tightening of the blood vessels. So when you're sore or inflamed, you get in a cold plunge and it reduces the blood flow to those areas, which makes them less sore. It makes them less inflamed, less swollen, because less blood flow is getting there. It does activate your sympathetic nervous system, which improves alertness and mood, which I think everyone could point to when you get in like a cold shower or jump in a cold lake. There's that moment of shock where it's like, oh my gosh, wow, I just got in this. And you do feel better afterwards. It's almost like a runner's high, but it's like a cold exposure high. I'm speaking from experience a little bit on this, but in Frontiers in Physiology journal in 2020, there was a study that demonstrated the improved focus and mood. So it is related to science, but I think it's pretty obvious that you're more alert when you get thrown into a cold bath. It does help boost your metabolism. Nature Medicine 2014 study found cold exposure can increase your brown fat activity by 10+%, and also increases calorie expenditure. So obviously that's your body trying to stay warm. That's why a lot of long distance swimmers, or especially open water swimmers, put on brown fat, because they will be burning that when they're swimming, because the water, unless it's 98 degrees in that water they're swimming in, is going to be like a cold plunge, and they're going to be burning that. So that's pretty obvious. So now let's get into the pros and cons of cold plunges. So there are a lot of good things, and I think like reducing soreness, rapid recovery, making inflammation go down, just able to rebound and recover quicker. Big pro of cold plunging. It's just like you can jumpstart being ready for the next workout. You can probably cut a day off your recovery to be ready for your next workout. So let's say you did a really hard workout or interval session today, and then you cold plunge tomorrow. You could probably be ready instead of what I like to think is the ideal schedule is probably 4 days between really hard efforts. You could probably be ready for a hard effort after 3 days, but that does come with cons. We'll get into those in a second. Another pro of cold plunging is like mentally, you are able to tolerate more discomfort. Now, there's this new thing in trail ultra running FKTs about mental fatigue resistance, pushing through. It's just like the pain cave thing. They're starting to quantify it and put new terms on it. So it's basically just like fighting through when things are hard. So builds mental resilience. Obviously, you're sitting in a cold pool, but it's, I don't know, an easy way rather than pushing for 3 hours out there to sit in a cold plunge for 10 minutes. Quicker way to build mental resilience. Also, it's pretty easy to cold plunge. You could just do it in your bathtub. So those are the pros. But what comes along with them, I think, is pretty interesting. So in 2015, the Journal of Physiology published a study that signaled that cold plunges blunt training adaptation. So basically, I like to think of it as if you did do that hard workout today and you got in a cold plunge tomorrow, to be ready and why you're recovering quicker is because you're skipping some of those stages of adaptation. So in training, in running, in all theory like this, the goal is you want to basically break down, adapt, and rebuild, basically. You are just doing, I don't like the term progressive overload because it sounds still has overload in it, but basically you're progressing, you're breaking your body down, you're letting it recover, rebuild, and then move back into the next phase a little bit stronger for another workout. So you're letting your body recover in between. And cold plunging helps you recover quicker, but it's skipping some of those adaptation phases. So maybe instead of gaining, let's just use easy numbers, instead of gaining 10% over the next month by a phase, you are getting in more workouts, but maybe only gaining 5 to 6%. So it's just skipping some of those stages. And I think it directly comes, I didn't find a study on this, but I would guess it directly comes from skipping some of that inflammation stage, which signals more blood flow to that area, which is essential for rebuilding, getting stronger, repairing some of those micro tears in the muscles that are caused by working out. And so that's why I think cold plunging might not be that useful on a day-to-day basis, but I think it can be periodized to work pretty well. Um, a couple other uh, cons, I guess, are I think it's easy to sit in a cold plunge too long. It can have limited, I don't know, it can have downsides for some of your capillaries and stuff and your toes and things like that to get cold. Not a huge issue. Another downside I found out there is uh, consistent use may limit muscle growth and aerobic adaptation, but that's basically the same as blunts the training adaptations. So how do you use cold plunging? So how I like to think of it as a tool for recovery once the majority of the adaptation has occurred. And so maybe twice a week at the tail end or the day before a hard effort, a cold plunge might be good in terms of getting your body fully recovered and back to ready for that hard effort. Because the harder you can go, better it's going to go, which I mean goes right into other things like bicarb that people are experimenting with or ketones, where the claims are that you can go harder for longer, which is really key part of the training process with adaptation. The longer you can go, the harder you can go, the further you can push your body, the more your body will adapt to being pushed like that. So that's kind of what you want to do. So if cold plunging before the workout, like the day before, the night before, can aid in that final maybe 10% in recovery to be back at 100% versus 95, then it can be a valuable tool. I just think it's risky. I think it's bad to do right after you work out, or I think it is also bad when you're doing strength training to combine it too closely with that. Uh, cold plunging totally separate in my mind from cooling strategies, because cooling strategies are basically shocking, getting the heart rate back to a normal level or keeping it stable at a normal heart rate. And cold plunges are basically lowering the body, constricting the blood vessels for a period of time that extends longer between topical cooling, like pouring ice on yourself. Okay, now that we've got cold plunges out of the way, let's do some, let's do passive heat. Let's do heat exposure. So I think there's three major ways. I'm going to just go with three. There's probably a lot more. So the three that I think of are, you can use a sauna. That's what I do, probably 3 to 4 days a week, maybe 2 to 4. That encapsulates a little bigger range. But 2 to 4 days a week, I use the sauna. I've seen tremendous benefits. It's been about 2 years of doing this. So yeah, that works. The other way for heat exposure is hot water. So if you don't have access to a hot tub or a sauna, you can just take a hot bath at home. The best time to do it is right after you exercise. Get in that hot bath because your body core temperature is already pretty high, and you can raise it even higher by getting in that hot bath or keep it higher. And that's where you get the benefits of passive heat exposure, which we'll get into. And the third way is you can put on more clothing and raise your core temperature more while you're working out with like a down jacket or something. And so this is active heat training, so it's not passive heat exposure. So it's a little different type, but I've also put it in here because I think it looks to me like it's pretty much as valuable and beneficial as the previous two options. Okay, let's get into science of heat exposure. So first off, cardiovascular. Blood plasma and red blood cell count improve. Basically, this helps you deliver oxygen to your muscles. This is like what everyone wanted to do in the Tour de France in the early 2000s and late 90s by doping. But this is a way to do it without doping. It just naturally increases blood plasma volume and your red blood cell count by being in passive heat or exercising and being hotter. Your body just adapts to this. So, I mean, why wouldn't you do this? There was a study in 2022 on cross-country skiers, and it found increases to blood plasma and hemoglobin mass, which is pretty incredible. It's what you want to have happen in your body. Blood volume, just more oxygen. Just think of it like that. By getting hotter in a controlled way, you get more oxygen to your muscles, which is what you need to run faster. Simple point there. I don't know what that term I tried to say was. Okay, the other thing, thermoregulation. This is kind of obvious, I would say, because if you're in heat, your body gets better at hot races. That's why people for 20 years have been going into saunas or even putting their treadmill in a sauna and running before like bad water and stuff like that. So really, it's like a no-brainer that if you have a hot race, you want to heat train. And there's also like 2-week protocols. I think there's a 1-month protocol there. It's like in the Carmichael training systems. The CTS has a pretty good article on this, but I do think it's kind of dated because I think heat training benefits should and can be used year round because they're so beneficial. Like, why would you only want to periodize the time that your red blood cell count is high and your blood plasma volume is high? It also goes away really quick. So it's very much like altitude training, actually, which I should do an episode on that too. But the main thing is if you stop doing it for probably I think I didn't write down the study, but I think the science said like 3 to 4 days is when you start seeing it decrease. So the key is pretty consistent use of passive heat. I spoke to an athlete today about this, and the key, I think, is really 2 days a week to aim for. If you can get in a third, awesome. And then you can ramp up and ramp down based on your schedule and where things are at as far as racing. So you're better able to adapt to heat stress because you have been in a sauna and heat stressed your body. It's the same training principle as like running faster, then running faster for longer, then you're able to run a faster marathon. you are exposing your body to what it's going to need to do ahead of time so it's ready to do what it needs to do. Pretty obvious. Um, in the Journal of Applied Physiology 2016, published a study that demonstrated that heat acclimation can increase VO2 max and reduce heat stress. Obviously, we've already hit on these, but increase VO2 max, that probably comes straight from the blood plasma volume and red blood cell count. So there's really quite a lot of benefits to this passive heat exposure. The other thing is it improves circulation by opening up the blood flow as compared to the cold plunges, which constrict. So totally the opposite. It can also be used in conjunction. That's kind of what I do, of do the sauna and then I jump into cold plunge just for, it depends where I'm at in like the lifting cycle of, especially in the off season, getting in a little bit heavier lifting. I don't want a cold plunge right after that. So if it's like the day before a workout, then I'll cold plunge for longer. And if it's the same day or the day after, I will cold plunge and I'll just use wrist-based heart rate and make sure that it gets down back into the 50s, which usually happens within 45 seconds or 30 to 45 seconds or so, which doesn't seem like too big of a deal. And it's just to get and limit that overexertion or overexposure to heat. So that's kind of how I treat it. I go by the wrist-based heart rate, which isn't that great, but it's the best tool that I have. I think the problem with heat is it can be overdone and you don't want to heat stress your body more than like the passive heat exposure. So I think some kind of tool like a timer or some physical sign like your heart rate is something good to use, because it turns into a lot of bro culture, like I alluded to at the beginning, where people go in and don't want to leave until the person they came in with leaves. And I think that can just dig you a hole. So if you think about training and how it affects the body, if you go on an hour run, you feel tired, like you went on an hour run. But if you sit in the sauna for 4 15-minute sessions, you will also feel tired, but it won't show up in your training journal or your Strava or anything, but it will still have had a impact on you. So your training stress or the stress from training will have increased based on using that sauna. So it's always something to keep in mind that you are adding to that exertion level with getting in a sauna. So if you do a gym workout, a run, and a sauna, that's a big day, but you're only counting 2/3 of that. So I like to just make a note just so that you know that you have added training stress, and you also need recovery in order to come back and adapt to the exposure to hot or running or strength. So that's a big thing that I like to keep in mind, is it's all cumulative. Everything is training in our lives. Even if you just have a very active job, that can also be a lot of training. Another study in the experimental gerontology in 2019, sauna use was shown to reduce stress, improve cardiovascular health, and even linked to increased lifespan, which is a really hard link to make. But I mean, causation, correlation, who knows? Just throwing it out there. There's a lot of benefits of heat exposure. So if we just get into the pros and cons real quick, the long-term adaptations increase cardiovascular efficiency, heat tolerance, relax, mental toughness, recovery, opens up the blood vessels, better blood oxygen flow, higher blood volume, more blood plasma, adapt to hot and cold races. So it has been shown to make you more resilient in hot and cold environments. Why? I did not look that up, but it is interesting. And I've noticed the same thing as in the last year or so. I've really noticed the benefits, and I have done better in hot races and in cold races. I've raced a ton of cold races, but just enough to know. Actually, it was pretty darn cold on the Ruby Crest Trail when we were out there. It snowed on us, and it was August. Who would have thought? But yeah, just more tolerant to a wider range of temperatures seems to be good. Some of the cons are I mean, you have to have access to a sauna or a hot tub. You have to have clothing that you're going to get sweaty and have to wash all the time. So it can be kind of an annoying thing to keep up. Uh, Also, sauna use, passive heat, the hot tub, it can increase sweat loss rate, which means you're going to have to take in more fluids, more water, but it also can change your body in the, I believe there's some recent studies out there. It can change the sweat rate or the salt content of your sweat by using the sauna more. And so that's interesting. I'd love to follow up with more studies on it, but it's just something to keep in mind that your sweat rate will increase just from the sauna usage. So a good tool is topical cooling strategies and things like that because you can replace your sweat with water. So your body needs to sweat out stuff, but if you pour cold water on yourself, that is like cooling down with your own sweat, but you didn't have to sweat out liquid that you intake. And heat doesn't provide any like quick soreness relief or anything quite like cold plunges. So there's no like immediate benefit. It's more like the cumulative effect over as little as a couple weeks. And so that's kind of where it's at. There's a lot of protocols previously on how you shouldn't heat train year round. I think a lot of us are now in disagreement with this. That kind of came out. Maybe it was CTS or USCA or something like that, that noted that you only needed to heat train for a few weeks leading into an event. But I think we have all recognized that a lot of the studies point to heat training year round. Killian heat trains year round, David Roach, Jeff Mogavero. I do. I don't belong in that same conversation, but I think it's a really important thing in getting the most out of yourself. And if you're not a runner, it doesn't matter. It's like a easy way to get your heart rate up, get a little bit of an aerobic or at least a zone one exercise. The sauna just has really, really good benefits no matter where you're at in life, whether you're a runner or not. It's an easy way to get your heart rate up, to push things a little like a little more in a different way, and build some mental resilience and is a pretty therapeutic way. I also like this added benefit I'm just going to throw in is when you go in the sauna, you don't take your phone in usually because it's hot and your phone will overheat and you can't use it. So I think that it's pretty therapeutic to go in there and not have a screen and you just have to think. You can just think about anything you want. You can converse with other people in there, but you can't stare at a screen. So I think that's a really cool benefit that doesn't really show up physiologically, but maybe would psychologically. Okay, so let's just do the rundown real quick. How do the hot and cold compare? I would say cold, use sparingly somewhere in your schedule where it doesn't blunt training benefits. Maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, maybe during a taper or something. Yeah, I'd say a taper would be a good time to use it, or off season, maybe build up some mental toughness or something, or I don't know. It can be good for recovery after ultras, but I just don't want to risk blunting all that training adaptation that's so hard earned. It can be really good for injuries to the cold plunge, anything from swelling to sprains and stuff. But yeah, I just would be really careful about blunting all that hard work you did to have those training adaptations. And now heat exposure. It is a longer tail, longer term thing. You can do it more often. The downside is you need access to a sauna or hot bath or get your clothes smelly and sweaty, but it also can reduce stress, enhances, endurance, VO2 max, blood flow, blood plasma, all the good things. So I would say, as the TikTokers say, I'm going to give heat exposure one big boom and cold plunge one big doom. Um, so I think that's pretty much where we're at. You could combine them. I think it's called contrast therapy, which is alternating between them. It really combines some of the benefits, but also has the downside of the cold exposure kind of messing up some of the training adaptations. There was a study in the Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance in 2018 that was not very conclusive on any gains from contrast therapy. So you would have liked a screaming thumbs up if that was beneficial, but apparently not so much. I guess beyond that, that's cold plunging, I think, and heat exposure. I think you should do it one way or the other. One tip for if you're doing active heat exposure, I think it's can be really good, especially if you don't have access to anything more, is dressing in warmer clothing. You're gonna sweat a lot, and I would limit it to an hour. The reason for this is it's really easy to get too dehydrated. It's easy to get your heart rate too high and your core temperature too high. And I think 1 hour is a good time to let your body get some of those adaptations, push a little bit, work out in a different way, but it doesn't push into any red zone or threatening zone as far as overdoing it or moving that heart rate too high into an area where it would take longer for your body to recover. Just remember, all these things are cumulative. Everything impacts everything else. So your strength training is going to impact your running, which is going to impact your heat exposure if you're doing a protocol on that, which is going to influence how you race. So I think there's so much good information out there, but I also think there's a lot of good coaches. So if this is all confusing on how to structure it, I'll just walk through real quick how I would structure it. This is how I currently do things, and we won't add in mileage, but you can do whatever you want. And this is more training for FKT style events. Currently, that's kind of what my training's at. So I'm in the phase where I'm maximizing basically running economy, running efficiency, and also looking for some strength gains in some key areas and some injury prevention stuff. So basically my schedule is Monday, I would take off usually, and I would do passive heat. So I would go to the sauna. I may do like a 20 to 30 minute mobility routine, but this is just for ankles and Achilles, which I've had issues with. Tuesday usually is speed day. So this is about a 60-minute workout with whatever I'm working on at the time. It's usually intervals from 1 to 20 minutes. It's a huge range because 1 to 5 would be working on VO2 max, like breathing really hard, getting that heart rate up. And then like 8 to 20-minute intervals would be more in that threshold zone, and building some of that fatigue resistance type stuff. Wednesday, usually an easy day. I would usually get in a strength session, probably fairly heavy on this day if that is where I'm at in that phase. So I'd do strength and mobility. That would be like an hour workout. And then I would immediately get in the sauna after that because my core temperature is already high. So it's going to take less effort and less time in there to get it up to where some of the benefits are happening. And then it's probably a 45 to 60-minute run, less emphasis on the run here. I can also turn that into cross training, which I'll sometimes do at the gym. Talk about that more on the Friday portion. Thursday, I really like having more of an open day. I like football and watching football. So sometimes I'll go and just run on the treadmill at a slight incline on Thursday evenings and watch the Thursday night football game at the gym. I live in Montana, so sometimes the weather's pretty bad for running outside. Or if I am running outside, that's going to be like a 60 to 90 minute, ideally with strides at the end, but I like to have one day a week where it's pretty flexible. What am I feeling like? Do friends want to run that day? Thursday's usually my day for that. Friday is it's usually a cross training day. It can be a 60-minute run, but I really switched to wanting more of a cross training day where it's combined with mobility at the gym, probably heat exposure, passive heat, sauna again. And then like probably arc trainer I've started doing now, biking. And when I'm cross training, I usually use a heart rate monitor just to make sure that I'm pushing hard enough. Actually, it's pretty easy to push too hard, which is strange to say, but it's hard. It's No, it's easy to not push enough and it's easy to push too hard. So it's trying to find that zone in the middle, which for me, I'm just kind of aiming for the 140s or so for whatever I'm doing. The arc trainer is pretty fun, I guess. It's kind of boring, but I'll usually do 30 minutes on that, maybe 30 minutes on the stair stepper, something that's lower impact than running, and because it's the off season. And then Saturday, I will do my long run. I will probably, I don't know, depends on what it is, can be anything. Sunday will be any amount of run, maybe a mid distance run with some strides at the end. And then now we're back to Monday. So that's kind of how I set it out. But that's where coach can come in handy. Sometimes Sunday I'll do some passive heat too. But I think the key is just getting it in every 3 to 4 days really helps with some of the science out there. And there's just like hardly any downside if you're smart with it. If you don't overheat yourself, heat training's like the next frontier. I think that combined with correct fueling and carb intake is going to change the sport and already has, along with super shoes. All right, that is cold plunging. That is passive heat. That's how to structure them. I hope you guys like this episode. Dove into some of the science, a little bit different thing. I just got done with a run and I have lost my voice because I am sick. So thanks again for listening. Appreciate you guys. Nope, that's just a shadow. It's not a bugger. Okay, until next time, stay elite, my friends.